Story 1. What the heck really caused the Bronze Age collapse? An unknown inventive series of events led to the destabilization and downfall of nearly all the major civilizations of the Mediterranean. At least 4 major empires that had each stood for centuries fell within about 50 years. There's almost nothing in the written record and frustratingly scarce evidence about the cause of the collapse. These theories most involving invading peoples driven by drought or climate change or even war. But we don't really know the details. One day, there's a thriving, interconnected metropolitan civilization building monuments and discovering math and science. And the next, it's just a ruined city. Starving populations and almost no written records for a century afterward. Story number 2. This is probably going to sound like a conspiracy instead, but Swiss bank vaults used as collateral by the Nazis. When the Third Reich was defeated and collapsed, the Swiss would have grossly violated their quote-unquote neutrality if they revealed that they had the stuff. They couldn't sell it openly, and they weren't exactly faction-friendly to the idea of paying for Europe's stolen masterpieces. My argument for the Swiss having them is based in their admittance that they dealt in gold and what would be today considered war profiteering. It's likely, therefore, that the art was indeed destroyed, just to absolve those who possessed them of guilt and or responsibility. I still would like to know if that art survived. Story number 3. Tokyo Airport, 1956. A man comes into the airport with a weird-looking passport, and in it is said that he was from the United Kingdom of Taured, which he claimed was located at the border of France and Spain, which is today's Andorra. But this man claims it's the United Kingdom of Taured. The police take him away to a nearby hotel to guard him. They were all awake, all night, in front of his room, and went in the morning to check and give him food. And he was nowhere to be seen. The scariest part, his locked-up documents, gone. Might not seem that scary, but they were in a completely different place. I want to know where he came from and where he went. Story number 4. My dad said, well, he knew what happened to Hoffa. Now, I want to say I have no idea if this is true or not, because I wasn't there. But my dad said he had never mentioned this story to anyone and seemed quite nervous even telling it. When he was younger, he and his friends got jobs at the rec center type place, mostly for dance, birthday parties, wedding receptions, etc. My dad was a dishwasher prep cook, depending on what they needed. One night, while he and his friends were preparing for an event, a few guys came in with a big barrel, trash type bin. The guys told my father and his friends to get out of the kitchen, wait in the hall until they were told to return to work. Well, one of the guys was waiting with my dad and his friend, and was bragging about how they got Jimmy Hoffa, and nobody would ever find his body. They threatened my father and his friends that they would do the same to them if they ever said a word. After the guys were finished in the kitchen, my dad went in and was told to clean the industrial meat grinder. Apparently, they chopped his body up, put him in the meat grinder and cooked the meat. Mixed with other meats, obviously, and fed the cooked mixture to the event goers. My dad never went back to that place after that night, and moved from Michigan to Florida shortly after. There are some other details he told me, but I don't quite remember everything. Either way, I've never seen my dad so nervous about telling a story, but that guy in the hall could have just been saying it was Jimmy Hoffa to sound cool. Either way, it was a body. Story 5. This isn't a famous person, I just want to know who killed my aunt. My great aunt, Vivian. She was committed to a mental hospital after suffering severe brain damage due to her father, my great-grandfather, beating her with a fireplace poker. She was making progress in adjusting to her condition when a nurse took her out on a day trip and completely pimped her about. Vivian was later found sexually assaulted and murdered in a motel room. Her attacker most likely killed her since she fought back. She was 22. My great-grandfather would not let the police investigate her death because he didn't want her death to tarnish the family name. Some years later, the nurse tracked down my great-grandmother and wanted to explain herself and beg for forgiveness, but my great-grandmother refused to talk to her. Vivian was their only daughter. My great-grandfather possibly assaulted his sister-in-law, who was also his cousin, and possibly fathered another daughter, but that's just theory amongst my relatives, and they refused justice for her. I mean, who does that? Story number 6. Paleontologist/science education guy here. Megalodon is definitely very, very dead. Fossils of it tend to be in the rocks from shallow marine environments, and it would have needed a ton of food just to survive. It could only have lived near coastlines or on the surface of the sea, where we would have absolutely seen it if we were alive. The deep ocean would not have enough food to keep a megalodon alive. It had to be close to the surface. Also, megalodon fossils vanished from the fossil record around the same time as marine mass extinction 2 million years ago. And apex predators like megalodons usually die out in these events. After this point, we also see whales become gigantic and great white sharks become more common, suggesting that something that was keeping them under control, like a hungry shark, must have been taken out. Story 7. This might be too broad, but I would love to know more about the human civilization before written language was developed. Biologically, we've been basically the same for hundreds of thousands of years, and there's ample anthropological evidence of sophisticated, technically capable human societies for much of that time. But except for the few human remains, structures, and tools we've been lucky enough to find, we know nothing about them. There must have been epic stories, massive upheavals, and clashing civilizations in those times. Events that could stand up against the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, or the turmoil of ancient China, or heck, even the Aztec Empire. Maybe those civilizations would not be the same, numerically, but the important elements would be there. Great and terrible leaders, people just living their lives, exploring the world, making great discoveries, all of the things that make us human. But it's all lost forever. We'll never know any of it, because they did not make the one discovery that would make them immortal. Well, story number 8. Jimmy Hoffa. Yeah. When I lived briefly in Detroit, the general consensus amongst the Teamsters I worked with was that he arranged for JFK to be killed in order to get rid of Bobby Kennedy, who was after Hoffa and his mob associates over the Teamsters pension fund. Afterward, Hoffa and all his associates who knew about the arrangement, Sam Giancana, all of them, were killed in the usual mob manner of disposing all your loose ends. Hoffa himself was burned in the Central Sanitation Incinerator, which, conveniently, was destroyed in a fire just a few weeks later. Story number 9. Hold your seatbelt for this one. Did Billy the Kid really die at age 22? The official story is that Sheriff Pat Garrett, Billy's old friend who was paid to track him down and kill him, shot him dead at Fort Summer, New Mexico, 12:30 a.m., July 14, 1881. But did Billy really die that day? They say that his body was buried at Fort Summer Cemetery, but all the grave markers were just washed away in 1904, so we have no way of knowing if his grave is actually there, or if the body they buried that day was even his. Now, this is where the uncertainty sets in. Prior to Billy's supposed demise, he was promised a pardon by New Mexico's Governor Lew Wallace, which was withdrawn. In 1950, a man known as Brushy Bill Roberts came forward claiming to be the original Billy the Kid. He told stories of the kid's life, potentially filled in the gaps of his life. In short, well, he knew things that only God and Billy could have known. He promised to tell the whole truth in exchange for his pardon. Unfortunately, he passed of a heart attack that same year, never having received his pardon. Upon examining Billy's body, they found 26 bullets and knife scars. 4 men who knew Billy in life were gathered and signed affidavits verifying their belief that Bill was the authentic Billy the Kid. To add to the confusion, the events of Billy's death have been unknown since 1881. The only witnesses to his supposed death were Garrett himself and his 2 deputies. One of the deputies had only a vague idea of what Billy even looked like, and the other had never seen him. Plus, it was at nighttime, so it was dark. When Pat shot a man blindly in the dark, one of the deputies immediately yelled that he'd shot the wrong man, that there's no way he could have known who the kid was in the dark, Billy the Kid himself. Pat said he identified him by voice, though no one heard anything but mutters. Pat was very adamant that he had indeed shot the right man. Despite the disbelief of everyone around him, the body was buried very hastily therefore after. Well, Brushy Bill claimed 70 years later that Pat had actually shot another outlaw, Billy Barlow, and passed his body off as the kid so the real Billy could escape. Well, in the end, I suppose we'll never know. Today, Billy's new gravestone lies in Fort Summers Cemetery, together buried with Charlie Beaudre and Tom O'Folliard, 2 of his gang members and close friends, with the inscription reading, "My pals." Story 10. So I really just want to know about the 6 Russian hikers found dead on a mountain. Basically, 6 Russian hikers mysteriously died. Some were found with radiation and, well, had their tongue ripped out. No one knows what happened to them as their bodies were away from their tent. Some were barefoot and naked in the freezing weather. Their tent had evidence of disturbance that made the hikers rip the tent from the inside to escape the source. It was believed to be military, as there was a military item found near their camp. Their bodies were found with numerous injuries, but the injuries were found to be too strong for humans to make. It's one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of Russia. Story 11. The Odessa Catacombs. It fascinates me there's a giant tunnel, sewer, maze system that could potentially extend miles that we know very little about. People do theorize there's hundreds of rooms and it goes on for miles. Yet only a few rooms are available to the public, and even then, only around 15 rooms have ever been explored, documented, recorded. Just imagine how big it could be. What could be in there? The amount of bodies. Nobody knows where any people are located, but there must be a lot of bodies. It's the perfect climate in there to mummify bodies to not decay, and a large amount of people entering non-public allowed parts to explore and see how far it goes have never returned. What really intrigues me is the story of Masha. Imagine how horrifying it must be to drunkenly stumble around in there, get lost and just keep wandering. Eventually your phone dies and it's pitch black. You run around for days screaming and calling for help, but nobody hears you and you can't find the exit. The entire time you're cold, hungry, thirsty, tired. Eventually you come to understand that you're going to die there. You last a few days and then your body's not discovered for years, if ever. Hell, people argue whether she even existed or she was a mere ghost. They claim the picture with the people posing with her body and the reports of military personnel removing the body are just fake. They're not entirely to blame, though. If the theories are true and the government tried to hide her death, they did a good job. If you search on public records, there's no evidence Masha ever existed. Rest in peace, Masha. Story number 12. I just want to know, how much has set civilization back? More frivolously, if Atlantis was a real thing. I'd be curious what aspects were real, and what happened to sink it in such a dramatic manner. Even more absurd, what particular thing was it that was the final straw and killed Rasputin? I understand this is a morbid curiosity, but I'm curious nonetheless. Unfortunately, even as I sit here, I recall another mystery that has, well, steamed so many. Is the Voynich manuscript Is it a very elaborate hoax, or is it something more? I guess it's just as well that I'm going to be given the opportunity to seek a single answer. I'd never settle on just one. So tell me, what mystery do you wish you knew the answers to? Drop your comments down below and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more daily videos of eerily similar stories to this one. Have a great day.